Take it. Namaskar. On behalf of the Raza Foundation, we welcome you this evening to the third Raza Centenary lecture. The foundation started a series online to celebrate the great master, Syed Haider Raza, whose birth centenary year is on at the moment. We have had two lectures in this series, one by Professor Sudhir Chandra and the other by Dr. Geeti Singh. And this evening, you will be hearing the well-known art historian, independent curator, and now a very renowned biographer, Yashodhara Dalmia. She had done by now two biographies, one of Amrita Shergill and the other of Syed Haider Raza, which was launched this February in Delhi. She has been writing on art and modern art and is acknowledged worldwide as one of the most renowned experts on modern Indian art. She curated the inaugural exhibition, The Modern, which was featured 200 paintings, sculptures, prints, and drawings by 12 greats of modern Indian art, including Souza, Raza, Hussain, etc. Her book, The Making of the Modern Indian Art, The Progressive, was published in 2001 as it's regarded as a definitive account of a seminal phase of Indian art history. She has also curated a large centenary show of Amrita Shergill. As I told you, she has recently published a biography of Syed Haider Raza, The Journey of an Iconic Artist. This evening, Yashodharaji will be talking about Raza explorations and achievements. So over to you, Yashodharaji.
Thank you, Ashokji. Uh, Friends, this evening I will talk about the art and achievements of the renowned modernist artist Syed Haider Raza. As his paintings transformed from elementary geometrical forms to abstract shapes in light and dark, to large swatches of color enveloping the surface, he imbued his works with an entirely modernist vision. His quest was informed with color and composition, which pivoted around the black circle and morphed into consistently new modalities. Raza had spent his childhood in the forests of Madhya Pradesh and found solace among the lush thickets of the Kana forest. Seeing his innate talent, he was sent to train at the Nagpur School of Art, and from there he made his way to Bombay, the center of art activity at that time. These were somber times for the newly independent country, which was to experience the ravages of partition. And in the midst of the ensuing communal frenzy, Raza's entire family left for Pakistan. Yet the artist chose to remain in Bombay, where he was a founding member of the forceful modernist group known as the Progressive Artist Group, formed in 1947, in the very year that the country gained independence. The group rejected effete revivalism and academic naturalism in art, and in the midst of a welter of existing traditions, carved its own path to modernism, linking it to international trends. Raza was to engage with debates and discussions with other members of the group, such as M.F. Hussain and F.N. Souza, which would continue late into the night, sometimes by the sea at Marine Drive. Their poverty of means was matched by their sincerity and talent, which would propel them into the mainstream of the art in the country later. To acquire greater training and to acquaint himself with the works of masters like Cezanne, Picasso, and Matisse, Raza was to make his way to Paris in 1950 on a scholarship. He was to be in France for 2 years, but instead spent over half a century there, coming back to India only in the later part of his life in December 2010. In Paris, he married his fellow student, Janine Mongela, and settled there, and later also acquired a studio in Corbeil in South France, where they spent the summer months. Post-war Paris of the 50s. It suffered from a sense of exhaustion and wore a haunted look. The regular places of the artists, like Café de Flore, Sartre and Simon's famous Café de Flore, had a deserted air, and the masters were present by their absence. The École de Paris had run its course, leaving behind the last remnants of abstract art, with painters like Pierre Soulages, Nicolas de Staël, and Serge Poliakoff. While the scene had shifted to New York, the city par excellence for art, Paris harbored a melancholy nostalgia for the masters of art. Yet a whole generation of artists from Asia and other parts of the world were to make their way here to imbibe the paradigms of modernism that the city still engaged with. Apart from the earlier Indo-Hungarian painter Amrita Shergill, a slew of artists were to converge in the city from the India in the 50s and 60s. Apart from Raza, there was Akbar Padamsi, and in fact the two had traveled on the same steamer to Marseille, where they were met by Ram Kumar, and who had been in Paris for some time. And in fact, later, Krishan Khanna and his wife Venu were to meet them and at Raza's place in Paris uh, for a while. So there was this constant movement from India and other parts of Asia, like artists like Zhao Wuki and Afandi from Indonesia, who were heading towards Paris to sharpen their tools of modernism. And this was partly an act of decolonization, where they were to free themselves from the imperialistic powers in their countries to establish their own personal and national identities. In Paris, Raza enrolled at the École des Beaux-Arts and in his paintings was to skillfully meld the careful structuring of compositions inspired by the School of Paris with the glowing tonal variations of Rajasthani and Pahari miniatures drawn from Indian aesthetic traditions. Feverish, intense works in the first few years in Paris had strange, uninhabited cities devoid of any location in time or space. The absence of human presence and an eerie silence create their own metaphor of a haunting stillness around the works. Thus, in Haute de Calais, 1951, the black sun hangs from a blazing orange sky over a row of cubicle houses shorn of all life. These dot the landscape interspersed by the spread of flaming sienna, where the earth and sky are an extension of each other. The black orb has an overpowering presence even from this stage, which looms over the intransient and unsubstantial structures below. The same uninhabited houses are strung like a chain across the canvas in the black sun. The unrelenting divide between dark and light lend an apocalyptic vision which could be hallucinatory. Raza traversed the wild terrains of Brittany and the lush valleys of South France to suddenly come upon a row of medieval houses or a stark white church. He would place them in a timeless space in his works, devoid of human presence, under a burning sun, interfacing with a cataclysmic reality. The artist painted with a raw immediacy, embalming his canvases with the primaries, the raw red of the earth set off by burning ochre and charred black. His diagonally placed houses would hark to Cézanne's tilts in establishing the supremacy of the art object. At this juncture, however, the works could be considered the rooting of the École de Paris style to his own sense of identity and country. As the burnt, passionate tone of his paintings gave way to more conventional themes, a new lease of life was given to these forms across the Atlantic. A stint at the University of California at Berkeley in the summer of 1962 brought Raza into contact with the works of the New York School of painters like Jackson Pollock, Mark Rothko, and abstract expressionism. The interactions between his flow of paint and the ideas of abstract expressionism were to lead to a greater lucidity in his approach. Raza reveled in this newfound freedom, and in his engagement with fluid brush strokes, even as his palette mutated to expressive use of color and his medium changed from oil to acrylic, his gestural strokes began to stroke the inner recesses of the imagination, unleashing a minefield of memories. As the artist stated, thereafter visual reality, the aim to construct a tangible world, receded. In its place, there was a preoccupation with evoking the essence, the mood of places and of people. Day and night, summer and winter, joy and anguish. These elementary experiences that are felt rather than seen became my subjects. They were expressed through emotive colors and forms, which became increasingly more gestural. The hot burning colors and the searing sensations of his land began to flood his canvases as freedom began to be accompanied by memory. Raza's feverish gestures, lent fluency by the use of acrylic, were like spikes of flame spiraling in all directions. The lashing reds, yellows, and browns of the desert were recreated in Rajasthan, the surface aflame with colors. Rajasthan, awash with influences of Mewar and Malwa miniatures, is recreated again and again to resonate the recurring climate of experience. There is no recognizable shape, only the fluency of pain and its vibrant movement on the surface. In the magnificent 7 feet painting Saurashtra, made in the early 80s, the burnished reds, earthy browns, sunset oranges, and canary yellows are loosely bounded to create a symphonic movement on the surface. The indigenous traditions of his country, where colors express mood, inform his work as well as the influences of abstract expressionism. in a series of vibrant etchings made in the early 70s, where he expressed his anguish over the destruction of life in the Bangladesh War. The furious whirling pools of reds and blacks on one side are overtaken by an unending stream of blood red on the other. Colors of colors like red and black, which are very deep and rich in Raza's works, express uh, both ecstasy and agony and vibrate energies which influence moods. The dark of the forest, the flickering lights of the fireflies, and the hidden sounds of night accompany his unfolding of memories. In forms of darkness, the flashing white spaces emerge from the somber nuanced black and are like resonances of the night. The painting Zameen, 1971, has a depth of darkness with its cold black, molten grey, and earthy brown spread over the surface in loops, curlicues, and wedges. In the in-between spaces, red, orange, yellow, green, and white can be glimpsed like flashes in the dark. The expressive quality of black, with its liquid intensity, is highlighted, making the night come alive. A blazing red emerges from the surrounding darkness in Kapovan, 1972, and segues into slivers of green, yellow, and blue to create a dense experience of the night. As we know, night held a very special meaning for Raza, and its darkness and the glow of that darkness is wonderfully transposed in his paintings again and again. In another evocative painting, La Terrier, 1977, the interlocking reds and yellows with the deep blacks and browns create a dynamic surface that is charged with an imperceptible energy. He painted La Terrier again and again, obsessed with its magnetism and its many hued tonal variations. In one beautiful example, painted in the 80s, flaming colors are enveloped within the impending darkness and flit through its fluid surface, creating a restless energy. These works reveal the changing shapes and the underlying rhythms of nature, as well as his own inner states of mind, which he was, he always listened to these states within himself. The density of the night held a special meaning for Raza, and it haunted him, as did the morning. A dab of orange here, a flash of green elsewhere, demarcate the area between the dark of the night and glowing colors of daylight. These could be his experience of a once known space while growing up in the forests of Madhya Pradesh in central India. The stillness of the night, with its eerie sounds and shapes, would reverberate for the young boy in the darkness. In the daytime, the enthralling spectacle of the village, with its diversity and colors, would weave a spell. As he stated, the most tenacious memory of my childhood is the fear and fascination of Indian forests. Nights in the forest were hallucinating. Sometimes the only humanizing influence was the dancing of the gone tribes. Daybreak brought back a sentiment of security and well being. On market day, under the radiant sun, the village was a fairyland of colors. And then the night again. Even today, I find that two aspects of my life dominate me, art and are an integral part of my paintings. In many of these paintings, we have the emergence of brilliant colors and shapes from the enveloping somber tones where the two are juxtaposed and interconnected, implicating a perpetual coexistence of dualities. When the darkness became enclosed in the circle in the artist's work, it relayed vibrant gestural strokes framed by brilliant colors, seeming to contain radiating energies. An early painting titled Mandala signified the notion of a centrifugal force of great dynamism, which by its power could symbolize the flow of the universe. The emergent image of the circle within the square became pivotal to his works. The frame of the canvas itself would have red, black, and yellow interlocking and unfolding, at the center of which, ensconced within a square, would be the throbbing dark circle. The painting Bindu, 1980, was a defining moment. It had the black orb as its central axis, where the swarming, vibrant red and black courses through the space of the square. As Raza stumbled on the vast universe of incoherent experiences of childhood, the floodgates of the past were opened, and there would be no holding back. He recalled, I never really left the deeply rooted, wonderful world of forests and rambling river, hills, and sparkling stream. The time spent as nature's child. You see, we lived in the country's core in Barbaria, Madhya Pradesh, where my father was a forest ranger, and in Mandla afterwards. The lush Kana thickets were my regular haunts, highly impressionable at that tender age. I soaked in every single feature of that beautiful landscape. So I let my mind wander, But that was precisely the problem. It wandered excessively, making me, I'm afraid, the worst, most distant pupil in my class. So that was when it happened. My introduction to a certain idea, which was to later become my leitmotif, an integral part of my art, the very backbone supporting my body of work. This was the concept of the Bindu. How can I ever thank my beloved school teacher, Nandalal Jharia? He left an absolutely indelible mark on me. Noticing my restlessness, it was he who made me wait behind, suddenly, one evening, facing one of the whitewashed walls of the classroom. On this he drew, carefully, with firm, strong hands, a large dark circle, just that, stark against its clear background. इस बिंदु पर ध्यान दो, concentrate on this spot, he instructed. I tried that. It was difficult not to be distracted at first, but then I got his point. Gradually blotting out much else, my mind settled down to focus solely at that center. It was uncanny, savoring every one of its essential requisite color, line, tone, texture, and space. I found myself riveted. Light and dark in his work would lead to the masterly work Mark in 1981, where flaming tongues of color on one side are juxtaposed with the black still center on the other, both equipoised as movement to stillness, action to reflection. The emerging and recessive depths of the painting are tautly contained within the frame. The flickering square resonates the opening gateways of realization with the still dark circle in the center. Below the painting, in a manner reminiscent of the miniature tradition, is the moving inscription, माँ लौट कर जब आऊँगा क्या लाऊँगा? Mother, when I return home, what shall I bring? Incidentally, these lines are composed and from a poem by Ashok Vajpayee. And these very lines are the ones which really inspired Raza to make his masterly work. The yearning for home with its blazing colors overflows and is reconstructed in an evocative flow. The dark circles emanating colors from now on began to appear increasingly in his works. While these had a distinct affiliation with Indian spiritual thought, it was primarily their plasticity which made an impact. As Raza pointed out, my present work is the result of two parallel inquiries. Firstly, it aimed at pure plastic order, form order, Secondly, it concerns the theme of nature. Both have converged into a single point and become inseparable. The point, the bindu, symbolizes the seed bearing, the potential of all life in a sense. It's also a volatile form containing all essential requisites of line, tone, color, gesture, and space. Yet he maintained an equidistance from both traditional religious thought and the movement of abstract expressionism, maintaining his own composition and form. Uh, his work is often identified as tantric in common parlor, but Raza refuted this. He claimed that the beliefs of Tantrism were far too complex, and he was very far from a practicing tantric. When he was asked to participate in an exhibition on neo-tantric movement in India at the National Gallery of Modern Art in 1983, he therefore declined. Yet in many ways he did explore the infinite possibilities of symbolic form, like the static feeble principle and the kinetic plane principle, uniting to form the entire universe of matter and spirit. Drawing mainly from his own tradition, the larger tradition of philosophy and thought in India. He attempted to consciously create his identity as separate from that of the École de Paris and strove to be distinctive in an Indian manner. In this, he imbibed other influences in a pluralistic and hybrid manner. Essentially, he remained deeply reverential to an inner core of being which was a source of renewal and strength. As he stated, दिव्य शक्तियों के बिना चित्र नहीं बनते. Without the interventions of divine forces, works of art cannot be made. He said, the small red canvas is staring at me, but the gods are absent. You won't believe it, but I cannot work without the presence of divine forces. They are tangible and real. I have to pray before I start working. They are a link between the unknown and the known. They charge me to a state of unawareness, and it is only in that sama, dreamlike state that my best paintings come, without my ever fully knowing how and why. It is a state of grace, inexplicable. As the art historian Pierre Godibert observed, thus Raza has grown into a universal creator whose roots lie deep in his own soil, but whose antennae are cosmic. He heralds the plastic artists of the 21st century in their ability to create every manner of artistic symbiosis and cross fertilization. This much is obvious in the gradual maturing of the artist, an alchemy arising from his memories of childhood, of forests and people, of signs and symbols reinterpreted from Indian culture and confronting the modern art of Europe and the United States. Through this has emerged an entirely original plastic creation. He was not only harking back to Indian tradition, which would have been revivalistic. He was bringing it to the forefront of modernism and creating a metaphor for contemporary art and life, which had roots. And this was his achievement. If Raza's early bindus are dense and immobile, they metamorphose into concentric circles of energy and still later begin to wade through space, suspended and yet animated. Finally, their potential as germination of life is brought into play, providing them with a universal connotation. The concept that the point carries within it the potency for all of creation, just as the seed carries the tree within it, leads to their innumerable radiating permutations and combinations with circles, triangles, and squares. In Raza's works, like germination, the seed is like the womb of the earth, which contains within it an infinite potential for life. And from germination, there is tree and water, and then emergence. As the artist turns towards the darker hues of the earth, it is as if he is delving into its very center to find an even more universal space. The delicate work made by Raza in the 90s, like Param Bindu, had concentric circles painted in ethereal colors of yellow, ochre, and green, revolving around a dark center. In Nad Bindu, the diaphanous sheets of grey, which turn white at the edges and rotate around a black disk, convey a sense of ascending to a higher world of light and sound. The monochromatic canvas, which expands into a translucent space, uh, uh, tra- uh, transfers an exquisite delicacy, even as its tonal variations create an atmosphere of meditative spirituality. At their best, the artist's involvement with color vibrations and a heightened spirit provide a heady mixture of paint and an exuberant sensual experience. At all times, Raza retained a passionate involvement with his experiences and drew from indigenous sources and hot colors of his country and his metaphysical and literary thought, while catapulting his work to the forefront of modernism. His pluralistic conceptual vision always remained ingrained to the core of his being, as also the vast universe of perception which informed his long journey. A journey from a small village in central India with barely 5 hamlets to the international world of art and culture, which became his domain in his later years. Thank you.
Yashodhara ji, if there are any questions, would you like to take them?
Yeah, I will take them.
Yeah.
1 minute.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Right. I can hear, though I've lost the contact, but I can hear.
Well, from the audience, if there is any question one would like to pose to Yashodhara ji, most welcome. Please go ahead. Sanjeev, are there any questions?
Ashokji, why don't you tell us about uh, how you wrote that poem Ma and how it became, transposed into that masterly work by Raza Ma?
You see, it's an interesting episode. Raza came to Bhopal at our invitation, and for the first time in his home state, we organized an exhibition of his works. And I had already discovered that Raza was very deeply interested in other arts. He was very interested in Hindi poetry, he wanted to know what was happening. He remembered poems of Mahadevi Verma, etc., by heart. So there was, and I was a poet, though I was functioning as the person in charge of culture in Madhya Pradesh. So he attended Drupad concerts, he attended poetry readings, he took notes of the poems. In fact, later we published his notes in which he had noted lines from the poems which were recited. So, encouraged by this and encouraged by the fact that he was interested in Hindi poetry, I gave him a copy of my first book of poems called Shahar Apni Sambhavna, which he took. This happened in I think 79. One day, sometime during 79 or early 80 maybe, I got a phone call from Raza saying he wanted my consent to use a line of my poem to be inscribed on one of his works. Now, this was the poem "मैं लौट कर जब मैं आऊंगा क्या लाऊंगा." Actually, it is the poem about the son returning home and not being able to bring what was expected of him, and in a sense, there was no return. So it was a kind of a complex poem uh, in which I'm also using some images of the last avatar, uh, Kalki, whether I'll be able to say that Kalki has come back and all that. So the poem was written in that mood. What Raza has done to it is entirely different and very, very interesting. What he did was he converted that into a letter to his motherland. So, in a manner of speaking, he is now addressing Mother India. If I return, what shall I bring? That's the kind of thing. So it took a meaning much larger and brought out a perspective which, of course, was not anticipated in the poem. And as you know, later and even earlier, Raza was one of the few painters who have inscribed lines of poems coming from the Vedic Upanishadic period to Kabir, Tulsidas, Surdas, Mahadevi Verma, again, Keyboard, etc. So this became a device, and he would accord the words a very prominent, respected, respectful space on his canvases. And this is one of the most interesting things that has happened. I think no other modern painter has used lines of poetry on his or her canvases in such a large number as Raza had. And it covered a very wide spectrum of poetry, from the Vedic Upanishad to Kabir, Ghalib, uh, Sahib Ludhianvi, Faiz, including younger poets like me, Mukti Bodh, Age, etc. Yes,
He seems to have been very well versed with all these poets, and
yes,
also he was able to write very fluently in Devanagari script.
yes. He used to take great trouble. Even as he was sold 90 plus, he'll sit down on the floor and take the some kind of a rice paper on which he would have in his own handwriting, which was very good. He had a very beautiful handwriting, very elegant and artistic at the same time. And he would put that and then transfer it onto the. You'll also have noticed that past 1980, most of his paintings started having names in Hindi rather than in French or English. There are very few canvases which were uh, titled by him in either French or English thereafter. They all became um, Hindi. And he would sometimes ring me up from Paris and say that this is a kind of a painting that I have done, and I want to call this painting this. Does this word convey the meaning I am intending it to convey? And he was almost always correct and precise in picking the word for his painting. Of course, one of the jobs when I used to start visiting him often in Paris and Gorbio was to bring new books of poetry from India in Hindi. So I used to
Mm.
carry a bag full, and therefore his library had at least more than 100 books of Hindi poetry, and most of them younger people. I mean, my generation or even people younger to me.
This is very interesting. Very
Yeah.
interesting.
I think there are no questions, so we can conclude. And thank you very much, Yashodhara ji. You have pointed out, I mean, these Bangladesh set of works had not attracted my attention, and I did not know that that was done. So that was an interesting fact to come to light, and the way you have. I mean, if I were to pick up words from what you said, there's silence, there's vibration, there's fear, there's beauty, there's agony, there's joy, there's exuberation, there's germination. Uh, I mean, these words, if woven into your talk, uh, do describe uh, and analyze Raza uh, very seriously, very beautifully, and also very philosophically. I mean, he was a thinking artist, and it is not as if whatever he did, there was no deep thought behind it. His search for thought and his search for form got integrated into his artistic process. And that is what made him the kind of artist he was. Thank you very much for this very illuminating talk. This is the third dear friends, and hopefully we would have in the uh, next installment. We have already requested Rubina Karode, Ranjit Hoskote, Homi Bhabha, etc., to join in this lecture series. Um, as you know, we have been trying to do many things. We have planned to do many things. The COVID pandemic has created difficulties. We still hope that we will be able to celebrate and commemorate Raza the way he deserves to be commemorated and celebrated as a great modern of India. Thank you very much, Yashodhara ji, once again.
Thank you.